Chapter 6. I had been on shift, alone in the cockpit for several hours. Of course it wasn't as silent as it usually was. A small room plus 5 tiger shifter kids. Accustomed to having free rein in wide open spaces did not make for a particularly peaceful nor quiet passing of the time. Points I had been sure they were intent on killing each other, only to hear Syria laughing in the background. Thank the stars she was there, because there was no way I was equipped to deal with a bunch of kids. I heard Ral coming towards the cockpit, teasing the kids in the tones of tigerese. I anticipated him coming into the cockpit, but he somehow plopped down in the co-pilot seat next to me much sooner than I expected. Stupid, silent werewolf feet. A moment of your time, Captain. I wasn't sure if that was a request or an order. Up until that moment I was positive that all I wanted was to go back to the usual formalities. It had been a one-time mistake that I wasn't going to repeat. I couldn't let my judgment be influenced by something as archaic as sex. I had a job to finish, a mission to accomplish, and nothing was going to stop me from carrying out my orders. But now that I wasn't so sure if that's what I really wanted. I decided to take it as a request. A second, Your Highness. I set a few systems on auto-monitoring and double-checked the autopiloting, and then did it again because I really didn't want to talk about what had happened between us. It was only meaningless sex. Couldn't he leave me alone? Finally I turned to him. Yes, Your Highness? He pulled up a screen. 3 pictures flipped into existence. 2 men and a woman. Oh, so he didn't want to talk about it. That was good, wasn't it? I stared at the pictures trying to think of a response. One of them looked oddly familiar. Aiken is one of your people. He gave me an odd look. How does a Coalition Starbolt pilot know one of my Black Ops undercover agents? And his real name at that. Fighting space pirates. Why is the Coalition sending Starbolt pilots out to fight space pirates? That's like using diamonds to hammer a nail. That was a compliment, I think. Some missions are granted upon request. He pointed to the picture next to Aiken. Jillian Khayyam. From the age of 12, she was a street orphan. She is also vegetarian. I raised an eyebrow. A vegetarian werewolf? Ral continued with the next image. Not exactly. Kaysen so. He has a cat. That's it? No other details. He's a wolf that owns a cat. That should tell you a lot. I didn't know much about wolves. They didn't really get around to the areas of interstellar space that I did. Cramped habitats and factory foods were not considered too desirable by werewolf standards. Aiken's picture stared at me. Ral looked at me in the reflective glass beyond the screens. You and I are not so different as you think, Captain. Like you, I have a duty to serve and protect. No. Every leader knows that sometimes soldiers need to be sacrificed. And though we hope we're not the ones picked, sometimes luck takes a dump and you have to be left behind for the greater good. And it doesn't make any sense for an heir to the House of Nightclaw to risk his life and certain capture for the lives of 3 random guards. Why are these people so important to you? He looked away, silent. I didn't grow up on Alzerfor with the trappings of house privilege. You'd probably call my mother's relationship with Alpha an affair. Your father cheated? Not in the Alzerian sense. Marriages among the houses are a matter of political contracts, enacted to produce heirs. Once children are produced and contractual obligations fulfilled, each of the parties are allowed to move on to other contracts. My 2 older brothers were products of political contracts. At the time of my parents' relationship they were already completed. That sounds cold. It can be, or not, depending on which of my brothers you ask. They think I'm lucky because Alpha cared deeply for my mother, a human from First Earth. She was a merc and the best sniper of her time. Jillian was a student of hers. My mother found her orphaned and injured in a tiger shifter village that had been devastated by a werewolf attack and took her in. Growing up, Jillian was the closest thing I had to an older sister. When I was officially invested as a prince, she immediately joined my personal guard because Jillian's last words to my mother before my mother passed were that she would always protect me. Jillian's a tiger shifter? Told you, things aren't as cut and crystal as the humans make it seem. Who is Jillian to me? She's family. He looked at the other 2 pictures. They all are. They're my personal guard, loyal to me, not the Alpha or my house. I had always thought that the werewolves and tiger shifters were 2 sides of A coin destined to be forever engaged in war based on mutual distrust and hate. It was the stuff of storyvids that I grew up watching as a child. For a werewolf prince to call a random tiger shifter with no bloodline or family ties to him, his sister said something about both of them. I knew that if I heard the other stories, and I let myself like him too much, it would be the beginning of something destined to end in pain and tears. Even if he was a good guy, there was always going to be an angle with him. Men with status were always like that, that's how they stayed there. And the fact that he was prettier than sin didn't help. You just couldn't trust those looks. I pulled a screen to block his reflection in the window. That's enough. What you ask for doesn't change the fact that the rest of us have serious consequences to face when we don't obey orders. He put his hand on my forearm. I looked at it, then up at him. His eyebrow was raised. His wolf blue eyes skeptical. A dishonorable discharge? Court martial? I highly doubt that. You would have my highest commendations. Ral thought too much of his influence on coalition bureaucracies. I shook my head, thinking of Commander Singh's last message. Follow your orders or you won't have any orders to follow outside of the service. Ral could see it in my face. He moved his hand to mine and squeezed. That's what you're afraid of. You're afraid of not being a soldier anymore. I looked at his hand holding mine. I pulled my hand away and took it off the yoke. Autopiloting took over with a beep. My chair turned to face him. I've spent my whole life being a coalition soldier. It's who I am. It's all I am. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaning in close to me. That's not true. I took a deep breath. I realized I was clenching the armrests and forced my hands to relax. Last year I was on a deep space mission shadowing this fleet of space pirates. I had been following them in my starbolt for days. Realized that the space pirates would be attacking a Tiger insurgents convoy of coalition POWs. I calmed my commanding officer. If I'd had enough support, we could have stopped the space pirates and rescued the POWs. His hand covered mine again. And did they give you the support? I could feel the heat from his hand warming mine. No. The POWs were low priority. If the insurgents figured out we broke their codes, the codes would be changed. But I couldn't let those soldiers go like that, like lazy fish that don't fight when you pull them out of the water. That to me was the worst fate. He squeezed. You didn't try to take an entire fleet of space pirates by yourself, did you? I tried to smile at him. I'm not that psychotic. I dropped word to some pilots I knew patrolling nearby sectors. Those that could come came. His hand stroked mine, drawing circles of warmth that seemed to spiral up my arm. He turned my palm over and traced the veins inside my wrist. So you not only disobeyed orders, you recruited others to help you do what you had explicitly been ordered not to do. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the hot trails of his fingers on the inside of my forearm. Well, when you say it like that, it doesn't sound so great. But we succeeded in getting those POWs free and chasing off the pirates. He leaned in closer. I inhaled, savoring his scent. If he could bottle that werewolf prince smell, he'd make a fortune and then some. That's not your whole story. I closed my eyes as if not seeing him would make it easier. My starbolt lost control and I crashed on a nearby moon. I was strapped into my cockpit, losing air with 2 broken arms. I didn't think the coalition would come for me, but they did. This was stupid. Was I really so afraid of being hypnotized by his princely hotness? I opened my eyes. His gaze was calm and entirely focused on me. Yep, I had been right to fear. You'd think I'd be afraid of dying, but it's not dying I'm afraid of. It's death without a purpose. You know who actually came to visit me in recovery, not in the military aside from my sister? No one. Space Force is my life. Without my starbolt, I'm no one. Handsome as he was, his lower lip was a little bit chapped. I don't know, but why this tiny bit of imperfection only made my abdomen tighten more. I had to stop looking at him. I pulled away, turned my chair back to the screens. As a result of my actions, the Tiger insurgents discovered we had broken their code, so they changed it. A month later, Aurelia was destroyed in a surprise attack, 5,078 casualties, mostly civilians. His hand came to my shoulder. You can't blame yourself for that. Can't I? Military intel says otherwise. The coalition isn't perfect, but there are bigger things going on than what's in front of me, and I have no idea what the big picture really is. He slowly stroked the back of my neck. Goosebumps rippled down my shoulders. The roughness of his fingertips was more sensual than any synth silk I had ever felt. That's the problem with you coalition soldiers. They force their best and brightest on tasks like hunting space pirates when there's a more important war going on. They train you to stop questioning. They are training you to. I took advantage of his sudden silence to finish his sentence. To be soldiers. His hand drifted between my shoulder blades. I was armored and knew. Technically there was no way I should be feeling anything. But my skin prickled at the thought of his hand on my bare skin. I know what it is to be a soldier. But that doesn't mean you give up your sense of right and wrong. The interstellar comm screen popped into view, beeping the alert of a call from Base Command. I sat up, away from him, my exo armor sliding around me. Your Highness, I need you to step out. As vexing as it may be to you, it's my job to make sure military codes remain secret. He frowned. Of course, Captain. And there we were, back to our titles, dousing what had been between us with a bucket of ice-cold formality. I listened this time and actually heard him walk to the door. I heard the door slide open. He paused. The Tiger insurgents changed their codes on a regular basis based roughly on the cycles of the 3 moons of Tigrantine. We told Coalition Intel. Your military should have known that and calculated for that. You're not responsible. It took a moment for what he was saying to sink in. Even if it were true, did it matter? Had they been lying to me? It doesn't feel that way. We'll talk more later, he said, closing the door behind him. Not if I could help it. I was done bearing my soul. It had been a moment of weakness, one I was determined not to repeat. I tapped a screen, exchanging the usual codes, usual call signs and codes were exchanged, and my commander's picture popped onto my screen. Her voice sounded as if she was reading from a script. The Council has determined the unauthorized cargo to be a liability. You are hereby ordered to dispose of it. They couldn't be serious. I knew there had been elections recently, but I hadn't had any time to vote or follow what was going on back on the capital. Planets of Gaia and First Earth. Thankfully this was audio. If there were visuals I probably would have been court-martialed from the look on my face alone. Ma'am, these are children. So find a free city and let them go. We can't do that. You can't abduct children from a place you're not supposed to be from intergalactic species that we're almost at war with. You bring them back and they're going to be turned over to the Tigers again. I don't know how we're going to explain this. They're a liability. Get rid of them. Commander, I have a question. Is it true that the Tigers changed their codes based on the cycles of the Tigrantine moon cycle? There was a lag. I can neither confirm nor deny that, soldier. So it was true. I sat back. My commander ended the conversation. I stared into my hands. In the palm of my armored hand, there was a coalition insignia. A predatory bird, wings outstretched, clutching a serpent within a circle of stars. There was grime embedded in parts of it, a chip in the tip of a wing. I fingered the bird. This wasn't the military I signed up for. This wasn't the coalition I knew. This wasn't why I put myself on the line. I punched the bulkhead. This is what I had been warned about. Old grizzle vets had come to talk to us. Some academy thing. You can be doing the right thing, they said. But as soon as there are elections, the right thing can be the wrong thing and vice versa. That's what happens when you live in a democracy. So then what's the point of living in a democracy, someone had asked. It's not that governments don't get shitty. The point is that when things get shitty, there's a path to a peaceful change of power where people don't get killed. Of course, I hadn't really paid attention. I had visions of glory, honor, and a life of adventure. And of course I had forgotten to vote. My Starbolt, as gorgeous as it was just a ship. But those kids, Red, the Royals, Aiken, and the other damn soldiers, they were people that didn't deserve the crap fate had handed them. They were both right and wrong. The point of living in a democracy was that citizens decided the fate of things. I was a citizen. I could change my fate. I could change their fate. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Fuck it. Aiken, you son of a bitch. You are so going to owe me. I opened another screen and began transmitting messages. Chapter 7. Only human-based life forms would be so idiotic as to choose to live on an ancient skeleton drifting in space. Savanus was a free city, one of the many supposedly unaligned artificial city-states that floated around the more inhabited areas of space. Built on the remains of an ancient leviathan, the Gray-mottled ribs of the snake-like beast were now curving towers where the richest of the citizens now lived. Everyone else, specifically the workers, made do with the lower pieces of the spine where they mined the skeleton for some ultra-rare mineral vital to maintaining the few hyperspace jump gates in existence. The entire thing was encased in an angel-made gravity bubble, generated by drones that floated around the entire structure. By most understandable logic, floating cities like this shouldn't exist, but Angel tech was crazy shit that nobody really understood. I veered the ship towards the docking port, waited for the port authority to grant me access. Ralph's voice behind me made me jump. Free cities are havens for criminals and pirates. For stars' sake, stop sneaking up on me. I'm not sneaking, you're not listening. Are you going to get a new hull? There. Yes. Among other things. There was a weird silence. Rumor had it that werewolves could sense lies. I see, he said finally. I set the ship on autopilot, swiveled, and unbuckled myself from my seat. He blocked my way. My face was only centimeters from his naked chest. His scent enveloped me, flashing images of what we had done. I looked up at him, trying to ignore how close he was. If you will excuse me, Your Highness, Red and Her Highness are waiting for me in the common area. He leaned in closer, almost close enough to kiss. I didn't know if that was his intention or if he was doing that shifter invasion of personal space thing. In an effort to intimidate, a dangerous smile spread across his lips. What games are you playing, Captain? I was warm all the way to my core. My back was pressed hard against the thin Space Force regulation cushions of my seat. I don't know what you mean. His hands came up to grip the corners of the two headrests in the cockpit, surrounding me with his brawny arms. You know exactly what I mean. I will explain to you and the rest of the ship, once you get out of my way. I wrapped my hand around his thick wrists, as much as I could, and tried to remove them. He didn't budge. I glared at him. Your Highness. He narrowed his eyes. I would be lying to myself if I said I didn't know what he wanted. 'Cause I wanted it too. I asked again. Your Highness. He released his grip. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, but Ral was right behind me. There was no way I was giving him that pleasure. Red and the princess sat at the table, immersed in laughter. Steam rose from their mugs. They saw me and instantly Syria went silent. Things hadn't been quite the same between us since Ral told her I was taking her back to her father. Change of plans. We're going to be docking in Savanus for repairs. Red blinked and crossed her arms. I looked at Red. There's only so much you can do. I don't really like flying a naked ship. Red grumbled. I don't want to say I told you so. I need you to make sure the cards are ready. Her eyes widened momentarily at the code. Yes, Captain. I took a deep breath. Ral, with his crazy werewolf senses, had almost certainly detected that lie. But Red would get it done. I turned toward the princess. Your Highness, I know there are certain items you need. I won't let it be known that the coalition didn't help properly care for a guest of such high priority. Get off of the ship and get what you need. Red will go with you. The prince said. Free cities are full of criminals and pirates. They are easy places for people to disappear. So you need to be on your guard. The princess and Ral exchanged a look. Take all the kids with you. They're driving me crazy. Maybe if they got off this ship and got some air, they'd be calmer. I turned back to Ral, still behind me. He leaned against the bulkhead, his thumbs hooked in the waistband of his pants right along that V-line. I await your orders, Captain. Your Highness will remain with me on the ship, to ensure the princess will return. He gave me a slow smile. Somehow, I wouldn't expect anything less. There was another risk to landing in Savanus that Red didn't know about. Had done a stint working undercover as a pilot for hire to infiltrate some space pirate networks a few years back. My cover had been blown. If I ran into any of my old colleagues, there would be trouble. I stepped out into the cavernous hangar where dozens of ships waited for entrance visas and clearance by customs. It smelled like old animal hide boots that had been left out in the rain too long. The bay echoed with the din of languages from all quarters of the system. Garbage and detritus rolled across the grimy metallic sheeted ground. Across the hangar I saw a grizzled old woman dig through an overflowing garbage can. A customs official in a wrinkled gray uniform tromped up the bay doors of the ship. He didn't even look up from his console as he started reciting the type of rote greeting that only came from bureaucratic clerks who spent all day saying the same thing. I entered false names into the tablet he handed me. Expected him to skip to the next screen, but he actually looked at the names. John Smartass, he asked with a raised eyebrow. You're kidding me, right? If I turned and looked at my big shadow behind me, I'd burst into laughter. Instead, I focused on the woman digging through a trash can. She found something of interest and stuck it in the grimy bag slung across her body. It's a werewolf name, I said. It's supposed to be something growly in wolf language. The clerk looked at us skeptically. He looked at his tablet. Across the bay, young guy all full of swagger and testosterone walked by and threw something into the garbage pile. It missed and landed at the old woman's feet. Words were exchanged. Looked like a fight was going to break out. I placed a chip containing too many credits on the clerk's tablet. He swiped it on his own console, and it beeped, signaling a completed funds transfer. He swiped to the next screen. The clerk let out an exaggerated sigh, then continued speaking in a bored, monotone voice. Do you have any plant or animal life unknown to the human habited worlds or unlisted in the Universal Library? A loud crash cut through the din of the hangar. We turned to look at a pair of wiggling legs sticking out of the trash can. The old woman leaned against the wall and took a swig from a brown canteen. Guess someone wasn't so old and helpless after all. I turned back to the clerk. No. Have you been in close proximity to alien lifeforms not typically in existence in the human-habited worlds, including but not limited to flesh eating sentient slime, singing plants, or griffins? As the old woman gazed around the bay, her eyes met mine. Did she pause for a nanosecond? No. Why griffins? Asked Ral. Griffins carry Morla disease, I replied slowly. The old woman was avoiding my gaze. As I watched, she turned her back and started shuffling away. Fuck. She had recognized me. It didn't bode well. Where was she going? Craned my neck trying to follow her. The clerk suddenly snapped his fingers in my face. Pilot, I need form B327. I stepped to the side. She was gone. That was too coincidental. What form? He put his hands on his hips like he was a teacher and I, a petulant student. The form that the towers were supposed to send you when you requested permission to land. We didn't get a form, I said. I swear he was about to make a nasty remark, but a glance at Ral changed his mind. Well, then you can't land. But we already landed. He turned his back and began to leave. You'll have to go back and request that form. I followed him off the landing pad. But we can't fly out without being cleared by customs. He kept walking. Well, in order to be cleared, you have to have that form. I dashed in front of him, forced him to look at me. So how do we fly out without being shot out of the sky? Sorry, ma'am. Not my problem. Whole fucking dark bureaucratic jerk. I clenched my fist. I was not going to fulfill the stereotype of the hot-headed female pilot. I took a deep breath and said as calmly as I could, Don't you have a copy with you? Pilot, there's no need to raise your voice. I'm not raising my voice. You dash. He stepped back holding up his tablet like a shield. If you're going to cause a disturbance, I'll have to call security. Ral moved between us, clapped the man on the shoulder and walked away several paces. The clerk's smirk turned to a look of trepidation, then fear. After several moments, the clerk walked away. Ral walked back several entry passes in his hand. He handed them to me as he strode past me. It'll take a few hours to clear. But then we should be fine. I followed him. You bribed him even more, didn't you? He walked past me towards the cargo bay doors. Nope. Apologized and explained that this was your first time landing in Savanus. And he accepted it? Ral looked down on me, a glittering predatory smile on his face. Well, I also explained he could call security, but then I would have break his arms and legs, and really it would be easier for everyone if he would take the bribe you already gave him and leave. Of course that would work for him. The big scary man act. This was one of those times I had to remind myself not to cause a diplomatic incident by punching him. I took a deep breath and willed myself to unclench my fists. It's not usually that easy to get rid of a customs clerk. They're usually tougher stuff than that. Not to mention the random old woman who apparently recognized me. They don't usually have to deal with me. The kids were lined up at the entrance of the cargo bay doors. They couldn't have been any more ready to spring if they were on catapults. I was torn between protecting them from the danger we were in and letting them off the ship for some steam. Ral could see it. I'll tell them to stay on the landing pad. They'll listen. Ral gave me an incredulous look, as if I asked him if wolves had fur or something similarly stupid. Fine. We reached the entrance of the cargo bay doors. I waved the kids out. They went running. They had been through so much, but give them an opportunity and they would play like any other ordinary kids. I left Ral with the kids and checked the clock. It was almost time for the performance of a lifetime. A swipe of my hand brought out the full-length mirror in my quarters. I looked at myself in my lovely black exo armor. The black scales were tarnished, but it was the kind of wear that spoke of survival and victory. Wouldn't win any gay and beauty pageants with my lack of body mods, but I looked like someone capable, strong, and most of all, someone who couldn't be cowed. It was my confidence, my crutch, my life all rolled into one. It was for better or worse who I was. Stars hit. Was I really going to do this? I took a deep breath and removed my exo armor power harness, leaving the control vambrace on my left forearm. With a few taps I logged the non-existent malfunction. I went back to the central gathering area. His Highness was there leaning against the counter sipping a cup of something hot. His gaze was as piercing as a multispectrum scanner, as he took in my clingy underskin, the only thing one ever wore underneath exo armor. He leaned back, barefoot as usual. For some reason he was wearing a shirt, along with a computerized vambrace on his forearm, the type of device nearly everyone on the capital planets wore. He must have picked one up on his excursion out. I liked the clothing change. I folded my arms across my chest. There was a chill in the air. I'd left the cargo bay doors open primarily to air the ship out, but there were other reasons too. I need to make repairs to my exo armor, I stated loudly, for the benefit of the black box recorders. On special missions like these, black box recorders were turned on and off at the discretion of the captain. I had turned them on. He came in close. I could help you with that. I moved away. I'm fine, Your Highness. He followed. I want you to call me by my name. I turned my back on him, fiddling with my exo armor spread out on the table. That suggests a level of familiarity I'm not comfortable with, Your Highness. He came up behind me. He placed his hands on the table, one on each side, trapping me with his corded arms between him and the table, whispering in my ear, if fucking you in your bed isn't familiar, I'd like to know what is. I moved away. That isn't happening again. We'll see. I couldn't let him keep flirting with me. It was easier to maintain distance by pissing him off or forcing him to talk about things he didn't want to talk about. A chime sounded. I glanced at my console. I had to keep him here for a few more minutes. The pictures of the people he had shown me had flashed into my head. Tell me about one of the men you left behind. The wolf with the cat. Cason so. The look on his face changed abruptly into a frown. You're changing the subject. Did he think I was going to let him continue talking about my moment of stupidity? Tell me who so is to you. He folded his arms, leaning against the wall, his eyes studying me too intently. He has been more of a mentor to me than my actual half-brothers. He had been the heir to House Greystorm until he reached his late teens and discovered he wasn't a shifter. He found his parents weren't who he thought they were? No, he was their child all right. He was born with a genetic aberration. He can't shift into wolf form. Sometimes that happens even if you come from a long-venerated line of werewolves. I suppose that's bad? Each house has their own rules about nulls. In Greystorm it meant he was out of the succession and disowned. I met him off-world on Galvus 9 during a short runaway stint in my irresponsible youth. Let me guess, you were doing all the things a privileged teenage prince wasn't allowed to do. No. After my mother died, Alpha was adamant that I return with him to Alzerfor and learn the ways of House Nightclaw. I didn't want to. I wanted to travel the stars. So I did. When I found So he was running a fight club, he gave me a job. Eventually we got into a situation where we realized So and I couldn't run anymore. And So, who had grown up dealing with werewolf politics all his life, refused to let me go back into a house of wolves, so to speak, without preparing me for what I had to deal with. You're lucky to have had a mentor. I hadn't. Ral took another step towards me. There was an irritatingly warm gleam in his eyes. His voice lowered as he smiled. What else would you like to know? That voice was too much and he was too close. I rolled my eyes and pushed past him with an exaggerated sigh. I shouldn't have asked, as now I would actually have to go through with what I had planned. That's enough for now. Heavy footsteps marched in. A tall man with white hair tied up in a top knot strode in. He had almost ethereal features, but the scars on his face attested to his experience. The meticulously cared for exo armor followed his movements. Like a second skin, the mark of rare angel steel. That stuff was nearly impenetrable and cost accordingly. Anduin, I said, stepping forward to shake his hand. The merc who survived. Captain. He nodded to me politely as I had instructed. Anduin and I had worked together a number of times when I had been undercover fighting space pirates. Eventually he found out who I really was. And I found out who he was. The usual combination of life-threatening secrets and escaping near certain death together several times made for a mostly decent foundation for friendship. I heard you were in town, Captain. He turned to Ral. In order to complete this contract, I require half the payment up front and half in escrow. In the event of serious injury such as dismemberment or death, the rest of the payment will be released to my heirs. Standard terms. Ral looked at me, looked at Anduin. He was a master at hiding his surprise. Telling Ral what I had planned would have probably helped, but I couldn't risk it being recorded on the black box recorders if I had any hope of getting back to a starbolt. Not to mention the bonus of watching the engines burn in his head while he tried to figure things out. Ral finally spoke. I've heard of you. You were the one who rescued all those people from Sarketh Station when it was taken over by terrorists. I could see it in his face in the quick glance he gave me. While I couldn't willingly disobey orders, it would be a different case altogether if he forced me to. Chances were he was too highly ranked to be punished severely for abducting a pilot so long as we succeeded. I asked in my most innocent voice. What's going, Your Highness? Why are you hiring a mercenary? Ral tapped the vambrace on his forearm and extended his hand to Anduin. Anduin did the same. As they shook hands, both vambraces beeped, signaling completed funds transfer. Ral looked at the screen on his vambrace. I think he might have winced. You'd better be worth it. Anduin smiled. You get what you pay for. He picked up the third cup of coffee on the counter. Captain, did I have to do everything myself? I rolled my eyes. Anduin picked up a mug of coffee. Wait, I said with the most ridiculous exaggeration. Anduin, why are you pulling out your weapons? This is a mutiny, said Anduin, cup in hand as he looked around the counter. For the sugar. I jumped as Ralph's large hand closed around the bare skin of my wrist. His touch electrified me, as if I had touched a live wire. I've got your exo armor. Obedience is your only choice. A slow hot wolf smile sparked in his eyes. I gritted my teeth, yanking my arm back. I know it had to be said for the black box recorders, but he took too much pleasure in this situation. Anduin snorted, trying to choke back a laugh. She's a feisty one. You sure? She's worth it. I was going to wipe that smirk off Anduin's face with my fist. There was laughter in Ralph's eyes. Yes, she likes to pretend otherwise, but in the end, she will obey. I kicked Ral in the shin and he didn't even blink. His smile only deepened. Stupid werewolf strength. When I got my exo armor back, I'd teach him about obedience. I guess I have no choice, I growled. I tried stomping away and sounding angry, but it didn't work without the exo armor boots. Hold on a sec, I heard Anduin say. Is there a reason why there are so many Tiger Shifter commandos surrounding this landing pad? Chapter 8. There are few things more frightening than a pack of kids running silently, with fear in their eyes. The smallest one, so young I couldn't tell if the child was a she or a he, ran directly to Ral and clung to his leg. Ral knelt down and gave the child a hug. A small face turned and I saw huge frightened eyes. To my surprise, the kid spoke in heavily accented standard, rather than Tigerese. They're here to take us back? Ral looked at me. Outer screens on, I ordered the ship. Windows flickered onto existence on the walls. We were surrounded by what looked like an entire platoon of tigers. I clenched my fists. Ho fuck me to eternity and back. How did they find us? Princess Syria exited her room at that moment. She saw what was on the screens. Those colors. These aren't the soldiers that imprisoned us in the teeth. They're the colors of Kai's house. Ral looked at Syria. You never told me that he was of House Stargazer. I didn't even know myself until recently. Why? Is it important? It could be. The platoon surrounded our landing pad. No weapons were aimed, but the intent was clear on our little decrepit ship missing an outer hull, filled mostly with kids. A single-helmed solitary soldier stepped out of formation, heading toward our open bay doors. She removed her helm. It's Kai's sister, said Syria in surprise. I'll deal with this, said Ral. I hooked his arm. He looked at me in surprise. I'm supposed to keep you all safe, I said. He gave me an adorably amused smile that made me want to kick him. Of course, Captain. But I thought that the Tigers aren't supposed to know about the coalition's involvement. I grabbed my exo armor and let it unfold over me. I'd have to deal with black box tampering later. I tapped into the console on my forearm and removed all coalition insignias from the outer armor. I can't let you go out there without protection. Red, I want all weapons hot. Captain. I heard her unspoken question. Any discharge could potentially punch a hole in the airlock shell that protected us from space, potentially sucking everyone out. Those of us with exo armor would survive, but those without. You heard me, Red. We're all dead if the Tigers really want to fight. Keep the kids inside the ship, Anjuin. He nodded, and as I marched out beside Ral, I heard Anjuin say, Hey kids, look at what I can do. I wondered who was in more trouble, the kids or the merc. Ral stepped forward, offering his weaponless hand in First Earth fashion. Prince Ral of House Nightclaw. The woman took Ral's hand. I know who you are, your Royal Highness Prince Ral Keshelon Nightclaw, Duke of Karain, Earl of the Black Islands, Baron Sirich, Royal Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Aurora. Ral was unfazed. You've done your homework, Your Grace, Duchess Kanona and I. Chin Stargazer, Countess of the Red Moon, Baroness of Jianguzan, Royal Knight, Commander of the Most Honorable Order of Starlight. The Duchess only smiled in response. I regret that we must meet under such circumstances. We recently received word that your sister was being held in the teeth. Stargazer wants you to know that we regret any mistreatment by House Sharpsword, who had been previously charged with maintenance at the teeth. They are in the process of being removed, and we will deal with them appropriately. Removed? Said Ral with an arched eyebrow. Haven't you heard? Said the Duchess evenly. The Tigrantine Empress has been deposed, and we're in the middle of a civil war, in part because of your Highness's capture and escape. The Tigers were fighting amongst themselves. I didn't pay attention to politics, but I knew this had to be important. Ral took the news coolly, folding his arms. You didn't bring an entire squadron of soldiers to apologize. Her eyes moved away from us. I turned and saw Syria walking out of the ship. We came at Princess Syria's request. Red tried to hide a guilty look on her face, but I had already known what she had done. I couldn't blame Syria, but for some reason I couldn't find it in me to be angry with Red, even with the Tiger commandos surrounding us. House Stargazer would let it be known to House Nightclaw that we had no knowledge of your capture. Had we been alerted to such a fact, you would have been set free. Syria stepped forward into the space between the Duchess and Ral. It's a little late, don't you think? Said Syria in a cold voice. I stationed myself by Syria's side. Ral could take care of himself, but Syria was still recovering from her injuries. The Duchess's eyes assessed the woman her brother had sent her to retrieve. Princess Syria Devi of House Nightclaw, I presume. I bring greetings from House Stargazer and request the honor of your presence at one of our sanctuaries, she said to Syria, to reassure you that we have no ill intent. We have ordered that Prince Ral and his people are free to go, so long as you accept our invitation. Ral blocked Syria. She's not going anywhere. Ral. Her voice was almost a growl. I can take care of myself. Ral turned to the Duchess. Why is your brother not here? Complications which will be explained in good time. I am authorized to offer you this. She held up a small rectangular chip. It's a one-use pass to all the gates of teeth and a cloaking signature to get you past Altian orbital defenses. Use this and you can free your men. No, said Ral. Yes, said Syria at the same time. Syria, Ral said, his eyes glowing. Her eyes glowed back. I thought she wasn't supposed to be able to shift, but Maybe the file had her wrong. This has nothing to do with you. They did that shifter glare thing at each other for several moments. Any hotter and laser beams would start shooting from their eyes. Syria finally said with gritted teeth, I'm not going back to Alpha. Ral was so tense I could see a blue vein pop from the side of his neck. You would rather go with them. I need to see Kai. Who isn't even here. The Duchess whistled sharply, grabbing everyone's attention. He's been delayed. She looked at Syria even as she talked to Ral. I assure you that the princess will see my brother as soon as it can be arranged. Do you think you're in love with him? Asked Ral. The question appeared to stun Syria. Absolutely not. But I have a promise to fulfill. There's a lot that rides on who and where you are, said Ral. I know, but this is my life. The siblings glared at each other. I knew what this was. This was a fight for Syria's freedom, for her right to live as she pleased. I could relate to that. I took a deep breath. There were worse things to get behind. Red can go with her, I said to Ral. I switched to the interior comms and muted the exterior speakers. I knew Red was listening. Red, are you hearing this? You've got duty. Take the cards with you. We'll find you. Yes, Captain. Syria walked towards the Duchess. Your Grace, I have orphans with me. Tiger. Orphans. If I come, I want them with me and guarantees that they will be fed, cared for and educated with all the benefits of House Stargazer. The gangplank made a loud thump as I took a step towards Syria. How could she be sending the children back to the very people that abused them? Syria looked at me as if she could sense my thoughts. Trust me, Captain. Was an orphan once. I won't let them come to any harm. I clenched my fists. An explosion rocked the dock. I shoved Syria behind me. The Duchess snarled. Rumbling feline sound. House Sharpsword ships. They've found us. House wars are a bitch, said Ral to the Duchess. The Duchess grinned. Yes, we have that in common. We have a squadron willing to engage, but you have to go now. She looked behind us to our de-hulled ship. Though I suppose if we are really acting civilized, I shouldn't really let you leave with a naked ship. You didn't actually fly in that thing, did you? That would be most courteous. And yes, we did, said Ral blandly. If I left the ship behind, all the secret mod hacking would be discovered by the Tiger Shifters. Inside my exo-armor I sent a silent signal to the black box. Recorders to self-destruct. It was almost certainly useless since the Tigers most likely had figured a way to jam the signal, but I had to try. I had to assume that the Tigers would discover everything. All the dossiers, the mission files, the logs, everything. Stars hit, the commander was not going to be happy about this. I had really screwed myself in my career. Another explosion shook the city. I had beaten the odds flying a naked ship, but I knew better than to taunt the Lord of Odds again, especially with a squadron of Tiger Shifter ships prowling around our dust trails. Give me a ship, any ship, and I'll get us out of here. Ralph's voice boomed. Anduin, bring the children out. The children came out slowly, Red holding hands with two of them. Syria walked over to group and picked up the smallest one. You're coming with me, she said to them. No one will hurt you. The Duchess sniffed the air, looked at the children with a closed expression. How did you acquire these children? I will tell you later, said Syria. Ral gave the Duchess a steady look. I will convey House Stargazers hospitality to my Alpha. You do that, and may we all benefit. The Duchess turned and growled something in Tigerese. Two soldiers came running. Follow them. They'll take you to another ship. Our squadron will hold them off until you can jump. Ral strode over to Syria. He gave her a hug even as she still held on to one of the children. She was clearly taken aback for a moment. He withdrew. She set the child down and quickly gave him a tight hug. Something made me look the other way. Ral was leaving her to choose her own fate. It could very well be the last time they ever saw each other. Stay safe, my sister, I heard him say. I'll see you on the other side. The Tiger Shifter's ship was another Jean-class ship, a small deep space transport designed for speed and maneuverability. To me it moved like a tired pachyderm dragging a load too heavy to carry, but then all ships did compared to a starbolt. Still, it got us away from Savanus. Now we were sort of on our way to finish the mutinous and highly illegal course of action that was somehow the right thing to do. Not only that, but the Tigers now had the Majak ship that had Evidence of my betrayal. Furthermore, they would be able to figure out Sector 9's highly classified modifications and use them on their own ships. If it ever got back to coalition authorities, I would not only be court-martialed, but imprisoned for giving up state secrets to an enemy. I hit the punching bag in front of me. Worst of all, I had failed the people in my charge. I hit the punching bag harder. I had been attacking the damn thing for what felt like hours, but I still couldn't get the tension out of my skin. Anjuan took a shift in the cockpit, and although I should have gotten some sleep, there was no way I could have. Not after everything crashed down. With every punch I thought of someone else I failed. Syria. The children. Myself. Ral. What kind of goddamn soldier was I if I couldn't protect the people under my charge? Oh right, the kind who engineers a fake mutiny and risks her entire career to hide the fact that she was disobeying orders again. All for nothing. I punched and kicked the bag over and over again, welcoming the ache in my shoulders and legs. The door to my quarters slid open, and Ral walked into the converted common area. I could feel his gaze on me and my lack of exo-armor. I decided to ignore him, which was clearly not going to work in a cramped space with a man who seemed to fill 2/3 of it. But it felt too good to be wearing nothing but underskins, using my own muscles, my own efforts to punch. Good idea, Captain. I'll join you. He stripped off his shirt, the muscles rippling in his chest. My breath hitched. Did he just hear me and try to hide a smile? Fucking math. I should have told him to go meditate or something, but I didn't have the energy to talk to him, banter with him, or even look at him. I failed him after all. I failed to protect his family. I turned my back on him and tapped a console, setting up a dummy on the opposite end of the room for him. I went back to punching my bag. I tried to avoid him, but I couldn't help brushing shoulders with him, feeling the whisper of his hair next to me when he moved. Technically, I suppose we had enough room to move, but his presence limited what I could do. Not to mention the sound of his heavy breathing, grunting, and groaning like when we fucked. I attacked the dummy until sweat ran down my temple, pooling into my cleavage and down the crack of my ass. I walked over to the sink and squirted some water into my mouth. It was cold, like that of deep space, so cold you could feel it moving down your throat and pooling in your stomach. But it still did nothing to quench the anger. When I looked up, I saw him watching me. He was as sweaty and filthy as I was. His hair was tied back and I could see the sweat glistening on his chest. Our eyes met. I was hot all over. It was ridiculous the effect he had on me, simply by looking at him. His nostrils flared. Holdark, I must stink. Without a word, he covered the distance between us. Before I could even react, I was in his arms. It was a real hug, a body smushing embrace. I was surrounded by that earthy scent of his, now mixed with sweat. A knot of heat unraveled unwillingly in my abdomen. His lips brushed against my ear. I know what it feels like, the failure to protect someone you were supposed to keep safe. I held myself. Then I sunk into him. His hold tightened on me. Felt so strange to be close like this, and yet so natural. I took a deep breath, breathing him in. After we get your people out of Altai, I'll bring Syria home. It's not your fault. My forehead fell to his chest in frustration. That doesn't make it feel any better. He stepped away but held on to my wrist. Spar with me. What? He pulled me to the center of the room and hit a few buttons on the wall console, which sunk the table and benches into the floor. A padded mat was uncovered. Come on. You know I'm no match for you without my exo armor. Take your aggression out on me. You attack. I'll defend. I'll go softly. First Earth-style Aikido. Come on, don't you want to punch me? This might be your only chance. I was sold when he said, punch me. I did the best I could. But I was a pilot, not a brawler. He exhausted me, easily deflecting and reflecting every attack I made. Even though I knew it was going to happen, it was so frustrating. And then I saw an opening and took it. I kicked his chin with everything I had. He fell backward with a dramatic groan. I stood up over him. Oh, for crying out loud. You saw that coming a light year away. Why'd you let me hit you? He uncovered his unblemished face, smiling, even as he cradled his jaw. Didn't mean it didn't hurt. I was hoping you'd start worrying over me. I rolled my eyes and turned away. You're not the first werewolf I've known. He knocked me down and spun us somehow so that I was pinned underneath him, my wrists above my head. So you've known other werewolves? Well enough to punch. Can you get off me now? I like where you are. His voice lowered. I think you like it too. There were rumors that werewolves could smell if you were wet and ready to. Fuck. I was in so much trouble if that was true. His eyes narrowed. Did you sleep with him? With who? Aiken Janer. The expression on my face must have said it all because Ral burst out laughing. He leaned close to me, so close I could almost kiss him. Why do you care? I asked. I'm surprised you're not asking about Anjuin. Ral grinned. His breath was warm and smelled of toothpaste. Because your body language says you'd shoot him with a blast hook if he tried to kiss you. What else was my body language saying? Panic raced through me as I tried to figure out some way of hiding my desire. That sounds about right. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. I don't understand you. I don't like being a temporary plaything to be fucked and forgotten. Neither do I. I narrowed my eyes at him. I'm not stupid. You know who you are and I know who I am. After all this is over, you'll go back to your palace and I'll be a pilot with a dishonorable discharge. Our paths won't cross again. I don't live in a palace. Does it trouble you, the possibility of not seeing each other again? No, I lied. That's not the truth. He smiled. I can tell when you are lying. Your heart rate skips a beat. Maybe I have an irregular heart rate. Then the idiot kissed. Chapter 10. If Savanus was a city-state of criminals and space pirates pretending to be otherwise, Vera's way station near Antares' fourth moon had no such illusions. The pirate haven sat in the midst of an artificial asteroid in a sea of radiation at the edge of an unstable wormhole. It was in an area technically claimed by the Tigrantines, 2 werewolf houses, and the coalition. All that meant was no one was willing to risk war by enforcing rules that weren't really important to anyone anyway. Everything illegal in the rest of the legit galaxy was fine with Vera, so long as you had the means to pay, you could get a hot meal with a side of whatever you wanted to fuck, snort, or inject. With enough money you could get all 3 at the same time. I wasn't really looking forward to visiting the place. Last time I had been there, I shipped out with a space pirate crew that decided not to pay their debt to Vera. The crew had been captured by the coalition, but if Vera saw my face she would take it out on me. Which is why there was no way I was coming out of my exo armor so long as we were on the station. I walked out of the ship, the exo armor covering me. I had reprogrammed the plates to reshape my appearance into a more masculine figure with a thick barrel chest and torso. My face was covered by a mirrored visor so that the only thing someone would see would be themselves. Ral was wearing a dirty mech's overalls and shirt. His hair was tied back in a braid along with a blue metallic design temporarily tattooed on his face and some plastic scars. Now he looked like a rougher, scarier version of himself, which of course made him look more meltingly hot than ever. The hangar was darker, louder, and far filthier than the one in Savanus. The ships reflected the place we were in, mostly patch jobs that had no business carrying living sentient beings into space. More ominous were the ships that were not only brand spanking new but some of the most expensive in the universe. You just knew that ships like those in a place like this meant owners you didn't want to cross. The dim lights flickered occasionally, revealing grimy floors with wet patches of long-ignored spilled bodily fluids. It stunk of urine, shit, and people who didn't have the luxury of water for far too long. Groups hunched around circles, some listening to the preaching of charlatans, others engaged in games of chance, with even more dosing themselves with drugs. But then again, this was a destination for the desperate. No one who had other options would choose to come here. We split up. Anjuin went to gather weapons and supplies. Since he was bankrolling the whole mission, Ral had to come with me. The werewolf was tense. He hadn't said much to me well since the last time we talked. It wasn't that the Tigrantine ship wasn't a decent ship. It was that we preferred not being tracked by House Stargazer, which they most certainly were doing. If the hangar bay in Savanus was a showroom for ships, the one in the way station was a junkyard in comparison. The detritus and cost of war was all around us. The haggard, weary faces of refugees seeking safety where they could. Once a colony was wiped off a planet or taken over, the former residents were often forced out of their homes. The coalition tried to do right by our own and place them on other colonies, but generally in shifter culture, both tigers and wolves were not so forgiving of losers. In their eyes, it was better to weed the weak out of their society, and so former citizens became homeless refugees. Ral saw me looking at a haggard family crouched together under a ship that looked like it would fall apart if you so much as breathed on it. Their clothing marked them as shifters, loose stretchy fabrics that could accommodate a change in form. His mouth was a thin line. Nightclaw's motto is loyalty. We don't do that to our people. Are those werewolves there? He grimaced. Yes. Every house governs their own people and territories as they see fit. You have your own private werewolf kingdoms. Not for long. Ral straightened. In the distant past the wolves were one people. Every life was cherished. Now wolves are little more than prey for the machinations of house politics. He looked at me directly. It's going to change. I felt a shiver. In that moment I believed him. I could see any pilot under his command would gladly fly to a certain death for him. I shivered again. He was more dangerous than a fully charged pulsar cannon, and I was an idiot for putting myself in a position that would keep us in such close proximity. The werewolf family started staring and pointing at him, whispering to each other and sniffing the air. I think you've been discovered. Ral sighed and walked over to the group. First there were snarls and growls. He said something to them that changed the looks on their faces from desperation to incredulousness to excitement. The older woman clutched Ral's hand, shaking it. She looked almost as if she were going to bow to him. He shook his head and she stood up. They watched him walk back to me. What did you say to them? I told them they were welcome in Nightclaw lands. I also told them they could take this ship once we were done with it. I raised an eyebrow. Surely you don't do this for every refugee werewolf family you come across. Even Nightclaw has finite resources. No, they've come from Tevra, a planet known for its lush growth of huroxen spice farmers. We could use them on Nightclaw lands. And in any case they recognized me. Need them not to sell us out. Against the main walls of the hangar, there was a wall of cryostasis chambers, stacked one atop the other. Modern technology had turned human cargo into, well, cargo. And if some of them suffered brain damage from improper handling, then that was the cost of doing business. You would think that years of fighting slavers undercover would inoculate the ball of fear and anger at the bottom of my stomach, but nope. Some things don't go away. I tapped into the mic in my suit and transmitted into the cuff-ringing Ral's ear. You asked me why I volunteered to fight space pirates. This is why. Pirates aren't the problem, he said, his eyes on the massive pile of weapons being offloaded from the ship in the neighboring landing pad. On another landing pad there was a group who by their once colorful clothing were probably refugees from Torian, the latest colony being re-established. They're a symptom. Peace is a pretense when the status quo is war. This situation was clearly making him angry, and the least thing I needed was a pissed-off werewolf blowing our cover. Come on. We've got a ship to buy. We walked on, visiting various used starship dealers. After seeing a ship that stank of rotting rendergastrolians, a hideously expensive but atrociously smelly sea fungus beloved by fancy chefs across the system. A ship that looked like it had been flown in the last galaxy-wide war 100 years ago. And another that was crawling with thousand-legged scapesecks. I was almost ready to steal the next ship with decent shielding and a functioning ion engine myself. Ral could sense my frustration. He patted my shoulder soothingly. Let's try this one last merchant. Anjuin recommended her. Anjuin also recommended the place that stank of rendergastrolians. We walked into the berth where a woman with dark hair and pale skin waited for us. She looked like any normal unmodded human, save for the solitary black wing folded up on her back. It was an ancient punishment in angel society, cutting off a wing and sentencing them to the ground, though now of course, there were cybernetic attachments that could change all that. I'm sure having only one wing was supposed to be something of a statement, but it was lost on me. Angels tended to keep to themselves and their own planets. She introduced herself as Lynn. Ral flashed her one of those glittering smiles of his, and I think she might have stumbled. Come this way, she said with a melodic accent, turning to display a shapely hourglass figure, her single wing fluttering just so. She looked over her shoulder. I've got what you're looking for right over here. And so do I thought, clenching my fist. She brought us to a berth. It was too good to be true. I took in that lovely green scaled shielding. Was probably a hologram or about to fall apart. I knocked on the hull. Well, At least it sounded intact. A coalition star screecher, I said to no one in particular. No, said Lynn. That would be illegal. This is a copy or so the original. Owner told me. Copy my ass, judging by the hastily painted over coalition insignia on the fins. I walked around the ship. Star screechers were the ultimate border patrol ships, built and customized by the Reagan Corporation out of Uhura too. Anyone was profiting from all these conflicts. They were. Almost everyone, coalition or not, used some version of a star screecher in their patrols. Ral walked around the ship, examining it. I followed, trying to look like I was guarding him, while my suit scanned the beautiful piece of machinery. Look all you like, said Lynn, following us. A few loose feathers of her wing brushed against Ral. I reminded myself that hurting the only seller with a decent ship probably wasn't the best negotiating tactic. She leaned toward him, smiling. This is a good deal. You won't do better. He smiled back. How has it been modified for offensive deep space missions? Ral asked Lynn. She pointed at the enlarged weapons modules and scorch marks on the shielding. This isn't your standard border patrol ship. He said. Ral removed the panel and I did an initial scan of the ship's ion core. Looked fine. He quickly examined the specs on a tablet Lynn handed to him and then handed it back to her. This ship will do. Great, she said. Let me talk to my manager about getting you a better deal. I'd be much obliged. Once the one-winged angel had gone, I did my best not to yell at him. You're so busy staring at her you haven't even checked the engine or the weapons systems. He smiled. Jealous. Oh my stars, could I be any more obvious? No. Yes, that was more obvious. It's part of the cover, and I know you'll do a check on everything, but we need to get moving on the contracts and inspections so we can get out of here. This ship is ideal for what we need. Working cloaking tech, strong comms. He turned to face me. You're looking for an excuse for rejection. I held my ground. I try to give things due consideration before opening fire. And then all of a sudden we were not just talking about the ship, but something else altogether. Sometimes you have to trust your instinct. You forget what line of work I'm in, but tell me, since you are so sure. Why this one? Why not any other? Sometimes you know. His eyes were as blue as they had ever been. I had to get away from him. I'm going to take a look inside. He didn't follow me as I ducked into the ship. I walked into the common area, past the crew bunks. Deep space transports tended to all have similar interiors. A kitchen/common area that could be transformed into a dining area, a meeting area, a med bay, or an exercise pit. I glanced in the captain's quarters outside the cockpit. I pulled out the standard bunk drawer bed, checking for scapesex. No way Ral would fit in there. What was I thinking? The drawer clanged as I shoved it back into the wall. Didn't need to share quarters with him. I wasn't on an official mission anymore. This was a total off-the-record operation. I headed for the cockpit. Through the window I saw Ral chatting with Lynn, his arms folded against his chest. She leaned forward, smiling. I yanked a screen in front of the window to block my view and began running diagnostics. Now that was surprising. The comms equipment was not the kind of stuff you would find on an ordinary star screecher, even an OD class. This one had enough comm equipment to bug, jam, and monopolize the transmissions of a squadron of ships. This wasn't an ordinary star screecher. These were Sector 9 mods. Whose ship had this been? I knew any form of user profile would have been stripped, but I did it anyway. To be sure. I checked the cloaking, a class and then some. A degree older than the cloaking on the ship I had left behind. This ship had been made for someone important. There were bound to be more secrets to this ship. Ral had been right. This ship was perfect. It was rather annoying to admit that to myself. But honestly, it didn't mean anything. Did it? Flying for lengthy amounts of time in deep space meant that when you got an opportunity to stretch your legs and see other living beings other than yourself, you took them, or at least I did. I left Ral to his negotiations, which he seemed to be enjoying too much. It may not have been the wisest choice to go out shopping, but so long as I kept my exo armor on, I shouldn't have any problems. Eating and drinking were out of the question because it would reveal too much of my face. Though that didn't mean I couldn't splurge on a few real food items like fruits that had actually been grown planet-side, rather than some nutritional facsimile manufactured in a lab. Granted, they were frozen and cost as much as a top line spanning bolt, but that was to be expected at Vera's. As I carried the cheerful pink shopping tote with a picture of a smiling feline, I decided to head to another street. Turning a corner, I came to an alley of weapons. Almost every kind of weapon that one could possibly conceive of in the known universe was available for sale here. I ducked into a shop to stock up on shard bombs, needles, and other exo-armor projectiles. The man in the shop looked as if he should be a patriarch in a home surrounded by adoring children. He had a warm, welcoming smile and a Southgayan drawl that made you feel instantly at ease. He held up a small device that looked like a flashlight. Mind if I scan you? To be sure of weapons compatibility. It was a relatively standard request at shops like this. I nodded. There was a flash of light and the man glanced at the reading. Wait here a second. I've got the thing for you. He brought out several boxes of various projectiles for me to examine. I can tell you've been in some fights, said the man. I nodded, picking up a box. And you've also got some top-grade exo-armor, the kind that the coalition military likes to use. I set down the box. He leaned forward. The funny thing about exo-armor, the man drawled, is that the more you use it, the more you make it unique to you. He moved out from behind the counter, sauntering past me. It learns, adapts, and changes based on the situations you've been in until it's almost another part of you. Too late, I realized he was blocking the exit. I scanned the room for another outlet, found one behind me and stepped backward. I glanced at the device he had used to scan me. Immediately I knew it wasn't what I had thought it was. An armor identifier. Gray exo-armor crawled up around his legs, thighs and body, until it is that piece of you that can't be mistaken for anyone else. Sorry, but I have a contract. He shot forth a long wire tentacle from his exo-armored forearm, crackling with electricity. Fire shot up my arm before my suit adjusted to cycle the electricity around me. I grabbed the tentacle and yanked him to me, hammering a punch to his head that would have shattered his skull had he not been wearing exo-armor. He stumbled back. Drums thudded hot inside me. Vera realized I was here. My mind ran through the route I had taken through the cramped little interior paths of this asteroid. Somehow I had to make my way back to the ship without being caught. Heat sensors showed the appearance of another exo-armored figure behind me. Tried to turn, but before I could, the second one grabbed me from behind. An armor-piercing blade emerged from its forearm, trying to find its way to my neck. I continued my turn. The knife scraped against my armor. My limbs were like jelly, trembling with adrenaline. My exo-armor was designed to protect against the vacuum of deep space in the event of an ejection, and while it had excellent offensive and defensive capabilities, it wasn't assassin specialized exo-armor. I jumped in the boosters in my boots, propelled us backward. I slammed him into the wall behind us. He let me go and I fell to the floor. A gray boot stepped onto my face. Inside my visor, the structural integrity rating of my helmet dropped as the pressure increased. Shot spikes into the thigh. The gray one fell. Not too bad for a pilot. I jumped to my feet, saw the blue one aiming a massive high-voltage gun at me. The kind meant to scramble a starship systems, melt delicate tech work down to slag. I had let myself feel relief too soon. The gun fired. Time slowed. I tried to move out of the way as quickly as I could, but I knew I wouldn't be fast enough. Anger and regret entangled my movements. My hand moved in front of me slowly as if I were swimming underwater trying to get away from a hungry predator. It wouldn't be enough. The bolt slammed into my suit, scrambling my suit systems. It knocked me backward and sent me sprawling. One after the other in rapid succession, the various subsystems of my suit flickered off, the weapons, the countermeasures, the medical readings, and finally the life support systems. No. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. Without power, I was essentially wearing an immobile metal coffin. Worse, my right knee was bent across my left leg with my arms spread wide. It wasn't an awkward position in itself, but to be trapped that way. The blue exo-armored figure reached for me. My heart pounded. At this point I was as helpless as one could be, frozen in a metal shell. This couldn't be it. This couldn't be the end. To my surprise, he picked me up and carried me under his arm. We walked out of the building, me only a rigid statue of an armored shell. Vera wanted me alive. Chapter 11. Vera was a perfectly ordinary-looking woman, the kind you wouldn't give a. But then she would smile, revealing two serrated Rows of monstrously pointed teeth. Criminals, pirates, the most hardened scum of the universe would bow and scrape before her. In fact, they were mingling before her as she sat on a jewel-encrusted seat on a dais presiding over it. All the room was painted with an ice-screaming shade of pink and yellow, a bright, expensive contrast to the usual grim grayness one usually encountered in deep space habitats. I was trapped in a whole dark metal slag of a shell watching her play queen with her people. I always figured I would die wearing exo-armor, but not like this. In all the ways I had thought I could possibly be tortured, being paralyzed with unscratchable itches all over my body was not on my list of favorites. I had relied so much on my pilot's exo-armor for my identity and for protection I had forgotten that there could even be weaknesses. And now I would possibly pay for it with my life. There had to be some irony in this. The very thing that I believed to protect me the most, the very thing that had become an almost essential part of who I was, had become my prison. Unless somehow I got out. Ral and Anjuin were still out there. Ral. Despite everything, the truth that I had fought so hard not to see was finally revealed, ironically in one of the darkest spaces I had ever found myself in. With more certainty than I had ever known anything in my life, I knew he would come for me. That knowledge kept me on the edge of sanity in the face of all the itching. Had been frozen for hours. They brought me to Vera, who didn't even say anything to me. She gestured them to put me in the corner in her little throne room. And then she went on ignoring me, doing her business like she always did. It wasn't personal with her. I was a debtor, and debtors had to be dealt with severely. Anjuin and a tall cloaked figure showed up. My heartbeat sped up. Anjuin. Vera had a glorious smile on her face. The kind you knew was the exact opposite of what she was really thinking. So nice to see you again. You've recovered from our last meeting. I can heal a broken leg, but a broken heart? Anjuin put his hands over his heart dramatically. I will never recover. Vera laughed. Stop frosting things so sweetly, Merc. She glanced over at me. So she knew Anjuin had come in with me. Once they fried my exo-armor, it was a matter of relying on her network of spies and informants to find out who came in with. Trying to fulfill a contract? I always am. She sighed. At least I know where we stand. Anjuin shrugged. You took someone that my current employer doesn't want to replace. He would really like his pilot back. Her. Vera didn't even glance in my corner. I like my room ornament too much. Though everything has its price, I think that the price of this one is too high even for you, my dear old friend. You don't know my employer. Then have him step forward and reveal his high wolfy Nightclaw self, she said, revealing she knew exactly who stood before her. Ral pulled back the hood. The crowd hushed. The blueprint was gone from his face, as was the crooked nose. His face was one of the more famous ones throughout the galaxy. Silence curtained the room. Then whispers exploded everywhere. Your wolfiness honors me with your presence, she said, sounding completely unimpressed. I want my pilot back, he said. Vera leaned forward. Let's hear your offer, Werewolf Prince. A skeleton key to the teeth. One time use only. My mouth dropped open about the only part of me that could still move. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Would he? The only change in Vera's expression was a glint in her eye. She tried to sneer, but the giddy prospect of something that rare and priceless was starting to leak through. What good is that to me? Useless, you can't get past the Tigrantine orbital defenses. Ral shrugged. Not my problem. Doesn't reduce its value, which more than makes up any debts or interest. I struggled, screamed, did everything I could to try and make this whole dark, useless metal shell move, respond, do something to get Ral to stop. He couldn't be so stupid. I was one pilot. I wasn't even one of his people. My face dripped with tears because deep down, I knew the whole dark answer. No, not for a mere skeleton key. Vera smiled a smile full of sharpened teeth. I want something more than that. I want something that only you can give me. I want to see you in action. Ral only smiled, a dazzling seductive thing that somehow managed to be terrifying at the same time. Be wary of what you ask of a wolf. Vera snapped her fingers. Bring me the other wolf. In moments, a primitive cage of bars and rust was hauled out. A force grid was set out and square around the floor, and the cage was placed in the center. Barely contained within it was a massive wolf-like monster. There were bare patches in its dull brown fur. revealing vein and corded bulging muscle. On its head sat an enslavement crown. They had been universally banned in recent years, though some subjects had been grandfathered in. In the past, one could rid themselves of debt by selling themselves into permanent slavery. Enslavement crowns were wired into the brain of the subject, allowing masters with a control to do what they wished, creating a living automaton. By the surgical scars, this one had been subjected to experiments. Ral narrowed his eyes. This is barbaric. The monster opened red eyes. It sniffed the air and began to growl. Scented. Ral turned and grabbed the bars. The metal whined as the cage began to deform. It was a prototype for a warrior project. It only eats what it kills, said Vera. And it hasn't been fed in days. Ral glanced at the cameras being set up around the room. You want a show? The cage rocked and banged against the floor as the monster tried to attack. Ral. The prince versus the monster. She snapped her fingers and one of her lackeys offered Ral a fingerprint pad. Vera smiled. And you will sign all rights over to me. I will kill this thing, he said to Vera, holding her gaze with that mesmerizing alpha stare. And you will give me my pilot. If you kill this thing. Ral placed his fingers on the print pad, documenting his acceptance. He stepped into the square as the cage rattled to the ground. The monster sprung up on 2 clawed feet. It unfurled into a thing that towered over Ral. There were far too many rows of serrated teeth in that saurian-sized mouth. Roared. The monster moved wickedly fast with a claw strike. Ral leapt back but not before a talon sliced across his chest. The crowd went ecstatic. Ral backed away as if weary, luring his opponent toward him. It charged. Ral leapt into the air, above the monster's snapping jaws, and came down on the monster's head, punching it to the ground with a loud crack. The crowd booed. The enslavement crown cracked. The monster wolf shook its head and howled in brain-shattering pain. Enslavement crowns couldn't simply be taken off. They were wired and networked into a subject's brain. Ral said something to the monster. The monster charged again. Ral leapt again, flipping around to the back of the monster. Ral could have kicked the thing in the head again, but he didn't. Instead, he leapt, flipped over the monster and took hold of the enslavement crown and crunched it with his bare hands. He landed on the ground with a crouch. The pieces of the crown glittered across the monster's face. Stand and fight, yelled Vera. Ral faced the monster, his lips moving, the roar of the crowd obscuring his words. The monster roared at him. The crowd pressed against the box and I lost my view of the fight. The crowd screamed into a fury. Someone in the crowd actually fainted, and just as I could see the square, the monster fell limp to the ground. It was over. And Ral stood there, his hair tousled, his chest damp, taking careful measured breaths. His gaze swept the crowd. He snarled, his mouth widening, his fangs emerging. Instantly the noise died down. His voice was like thunder. I want my pilot back. Vera waved lazily in my direction. I suppose I could do you a favor. Ral approached me. He placed little discs all over my armor. Microbombs. The only thing that could quickly cut through the slag of a metal shell I was in. Sorry, Captain, he said quietly. This might sting a little. I gritted my teeth. Ready, he said, even though there was no way he could hear or see me. I closed my eyes. There was a high-pitched sound that quickly rose to unbearable proportions. My ears split. Millions of hot metal shards slammed into my skin. My flesh burned. In sharp searing pain. The ground rushed to meet me, but Ral caught me. I couldn't control my limbs at first, but as the blood returned to flesh that had been held still for too long, my body was pierced by sharp spines of awareness. I'm ashamed to say I was screaming from the pain, which is probably why Ral injected me with something to knock me out. When I awoke, I was in a med bunk. I had aches and pains all over as if I had bruises from being hit several times with a rubber mallet. As I tried to sit up, the glass casing above me opened. Ral was slumped against the wall, sitting on a stool in an impossibly uncomfortable position, asleep. I looked around. We were in the common area of the ship that he had apparently bought from Lynn. Wall screens showed us already in transit toward Altai. I looked back at Ral sleeping. Handsome was still his middle name, but he looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen. I rubbed my head. There was an all too familiar fogginess in my head that told me I had been under medical sedation. Had my injuries been that bad? I stood up, brought up the control panel and turned on a self-cam to act as a quick mirror. No more exo-armor. Just ordinary human me. I glanced at the ship around us. I took a breath. The confidence that having an armored shell that would protect you from the vacuum of space should you be blown out of your ship was missing. Or knowing that you could protect yourself from most attacks without much problem. But for some reason I didn't miss it as much as I thought I would. You shouldn't be up, Ral said. I turned. He remained in the same position, eyes closed. I went back to the bed, sat on the edge, legs dangling off. How long have I been out? He stretched, sat up and moved closer to me. 2 days. The nano nurses have removed all the shrapnel from your skin. You're still on some heavy painkillers, but you should quickly regain normal function within the next day or so. I rubbed the dull ache in my forehead. Lynn's ship, huh? Who's flying? Anduin for now. We won't really need you until the final approach into Eltai. I looked up at the screen that projected our location. No, you'll need me. Once you get to Tigrantine space in a day or so, you'll have to get past the border patrol. Anduin thinks he knows, but the Merc's specialty is hand combat, not flying. As you wish. During the fight, were you trying to talk to the wolf? I was. I reminded him of what he had been. He asked for death. He had killed someone to save me, and yet I was more troubled by the fact that he didn't address me by the title captain, or by my name. Yes, I was definitely dented in the head. I remembered every thought I had about him when I was trapped. Yet, confronted with the reality of him, everything was as uncertain as quantum entanglement. I fell back to insults. You're foolish, Wolf. You should not have given her the key. He shrugged as if he knew what I was going to say. We couldn't fight our way out of there. It's useless when you're outnumbered in an artificial habitat, where every single hallway and room has gas vents that will incapacitate or kill anyone who even remotely causes a disturbance. I pushed at him as I attempted to struggle off the bed. My voice rose. You didn't need to do that. His hands were on my shoulders, holding me in place as he forced me to look him in the eyes. When it comes to you, I will do as I please. Pleases me to have my pilot, regardless of whether or not she realizes how important she is to me or how much she tries to convince herself otherwise. His words reminded me of my thoughts when locked in that armored shell. I had been cursing myself for not taking advantage of what was offered, for forgetting exactly how brief life could be, even if there was nothing but a long dark future ahead. I tried to respond, but he put a finger to my lips. His voice was raw. No one will take you from me. I will come for you every time. He crushed his mouth to mine. It was like the microsecond before a ship jumps from imminent death, still and full of heartbeat. He demolished my wall of misgivings, demanded my acceptance with his relentless persistence. No more armor, no more resistance, no more denial, no choice but surrender. I wanted more, I needed more, and if I didn't, I would evaporate into nothing if I didn't have him now. He went stiff, breaking away. He held himself at arm's length, tense all over, as he forcibly restrained himself. His voice was rough. Sky, you need to heal. I need this. I need you. Please. The please halted him. He hauled me on top of him. Ral, what are you doing? He flipped me on my back. His fingers were already at the slickness of my core, taking proper care of a patient who just emerged from a medically induced coma. I looked at this impossibly beautiful man, mine for the moment. I wanted him to be mine forever. My voice was husky. What are we doing, Ral? He gave me a deliciously smoldering smile, the kind that could actually distract me from my flying. I tingled with realization. That smile was mine and mine alone. Right now, I'm getting ready to make love to you. Stop fighting me. Let me take care of you. I placed my hands on his chest, taking in those hard plates of muscle. He lowered himself to me. We both sighed at the delicious connection, that incredible feeling of him deep in me, stretching me. I squeezed him, started him like a rocket. I let out a cry. He buried himself hilt deep, touching his forehead to mine. You take me beyond reason, Sky. You're mine. Yes, I breathed. What? He growled, my response stunning him. I couldn't even respond, couldn't even speak, other than to urge him faster. Faster, more. I closed my eyes, trying not to let the sensation overtake Me so soon, but I was so close. Sky, look at me. I looked at this amazing man. Yes. We both fucking exploded. Later, I lay in his strong arms, breathing him in, savoring his smell. His hand skimmed my back. At some point, he'd gotten some wipes and cleaned us both up. Now we were savoring each other, me on top of him in the tiny little med bunk. I didn't want to ask, didn't want to break the spell, but I knew I couldn't pretend forever. Why me? Couldn't be just the way I smelled. Because, my brave, stubborn captain, you never let me intimidate you. Couldn't convince you, bribe you, or seduce you otherwise. No, what finally shook you from your mission was a realization that it wasn't fulfilling any of the goals you thought you had signed up for. And when you realized it, you took the risk of defying your superiors to protect the helpless at the cost of everything you thought you worked for. Not everyone would do that. I pulled away so I could look him in the face. I would be lying if I said you didn't have a great deal to do with it. He smiled a smile that could defrost a cryochamber. That is probably the most agreeable statement you've made. I looked away. I had asked him why, and he had answered. And yet it wasn't enough. Couldn't be that simple. He cupped my chin, made me face him. War is coming, and it's not going to be limited to distant colonies and outer rim planets that no one cares about. Need you to keep me honest, to remind me of what we're truly fighting for. That's a lot to put on a random pilot. You're not a random pilot. You are the most edge-shard psychotic pilot in this galaxy. He stroked my arm slowly. I tried to ignore the slickening warmth between my legs. How was it possible that I wanted him again? His voice lowered. Watching you with that yoke in the cockpit was sheer sexual torture. That's good, right? I didn't think so at the time. I was hard all the time walking around your ship, surrounded by the scent of you. And now, he kissed a trail down my neck, down my chest, going down even further. Now I want to eat you constantly. He rumbled with a grin as he lowered his head. I shuddered and grabbed his shoulders. You're trying to distract me. You, my captain? You have the focus of a laser. He blew a warm breath across my inner thighs. My core clenched in response. Surely nothing so common as physical distraction can undo my dear captain's focus. My fingers wound their way into his hair. How are you going to get into the teeth? Don't worry. I have a plan. He gave me that brilliant knowing smile of his. That made me melt into a helpless puddle. Breaking into the teeth was never going to be the hardest part, Sky. The hardest part was always convincing you to get us there.